Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're your hosts, Dr. Ray Ciervo and Allie Kilmurray. This show will help you better understand the reliability of Christianity, the Bible, faith, and worldview. We believe that pat answers have no place here. And for those that don't know, a pat answer is a not well thought out, shallow answer. Our answers will be biblically sound, logically reasonable, and culturally relevant. Tonight, we'll be talking about objective truth. Stay tuned.
Hi, Al.
Hello, here we are. We're
Here
back
we
again,
are. Off again, yes. How
back
you
at it.
doing? Yep.
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Happy to be
So-
here.
Good. So let's start with some questions and
Yep.
we'll move along.
Okay, so the first question that I wanted to ask tonight is what is truth?
Yeah, that really is the question. That's probably one of the best questions that is asked in the Bible. We understand Pilate asked Jesus that after he made the comment about he was born to testify to the truth. And he said that those who are of the truth, they hear me, they know who I am. And Pilate turned around and said, what is truth? So we pick on that and pick that up and say, okay, let's answer this. And the classical definition of truth is that truth has to correspond to reality. Another way of saying that is any truth statement has to correspond to what actually is. So some people simplify it and say it's telling it like it is. That's what the truth is. So we're identifying something in reality, which might prompt the question, what do we mean by reality?
Mhm.
And reality has to do with everything that exists. Even if it exists in my mind, it exists. It may not be a tangible existence. I'm looking at my desk with computer screens and a bookcase behind it and photographs. I know those things exist. They exist here in my study. So, the philosophical way, and I don't want to get too crazy with this, it has existence. It has being. In other words, that's what existence means. That's what reality means. So, something that's real is what actually exists. So a truth statement has to correspond to that, has to relate to that, be actually what it is. So am I getting too wordy, too philosophical, or?
No, I don't think so. I think it's important to know these aspects of truth. So, really, it has to correspond to
To what?
reality.
Yeah,
It has to be what is
yeah.
real.
So, yeah, another way of doing that is saying, if I were saying the sun is shining today in Eatontown, New Jersey, on the Jersey shore, that statement is only true if, in fact, the sun is shining.
Right.
Um, I'm not talking about Africa or Europe. I'm talking about where I live right now and say the sun is shining. That means that statement is true because it corresponds to what's real. So, and we can unpack that a little bit more as we
Move
look at it.
along.
Yeah,
Okay, so the next question that I have is what is objective truth versus subjective truth?
yeah. And that's a great question, or the way we look at that. This is my take on it, okay? I think all truth is objective. And what we mean by objective truth is that it's true whether I believe it or not, whether I experience it or not.
No matter how you feel about it.
Exactly. Doesn't matter. My feelings don't affect it at all. They don't do anything to it. All truth is objective. On my desk, I have a painted rock that my daughter gave me that has a big D on it for dad and a bunch of hearts. And that rock is there whether you see it or not, whether you ever knew that rock existed. And The only way you can know it's there is if you either believe me that I say it's there, or you come and see it personally. But it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not, whether it's there or not. It's objective. It doesn't depend on you believing it, anybody else believing it, not even me believing it. It just exists right there. That means it's true, and it's objectively true. Subjective truth is really nothing more than an opinion. Could you give me some examples of what people would say, especially younger people, although I think it's gone beyond,
Beyond.
yeah,
Yes.
it's
Millennials.
yeah, millennials
Yeah.
or Gen Zers or, yeah, what are the things that they say? I mean, I could tell you what I hear, but there
Hmm.
might be other things that are being said. That's your truth,
Yeah.
right?
Or this is my truth.
Right. What do you mean by that's your truth? Is that true for everybody, or is it just true for you? Because
Just
it's,
for me.
yeah, because
Yeah.
then
That's,
it's really just an opinion, isn't it?
yeah.
You could talk about aspirations, things you want to do, things you want to have or become, and they could be your opinion or they can be your goals, but it
Hmm.
doesn't make them true. Unless it exists in reality, it's not true. Um,
Right.
we have to deal with it. And that's one of the things that we have to deal with in culture. And it's because of what we call postmodernism that these things have even become an issue. And actually, what we're living in today is because we've lost objective truth. We've lost truth that is true for everybody all the time, in all places. And I think I said this on the first video that we did, that without truth, there's no hope for a moral society. I don't know if I said it
Right.
there, if I said it in another place, but there is no hope for a moral society because once you lose truth, you lose any way to lay hold of what is real or be able to say what's real. And we're given over to a bunch of things. I was just thinking of the illustration we talked about before is that if we lose true north, we don't know how to go anywhere. We can't give anything but subjective directions to go anywhere or get anywhere because we can't say go north. We don't know what north is. And when you lose truth, you lose true north. And that's the fixed point on a compass that everybody uses to go any other place because of magnetic north. The compass always points to that place. And if I'm facing north and I'm going to my left, I know I'm going west. If I'm facing north and I go to my right, I know I'm going east. If I'm turned around 180 degrees, then I know that I'm going south. But once I lose that fixed position,
Fixed. That's a
yeah,
key word.
yeah,
Yeah. I also heard, can I just share something?
absolutely, yeah, sure,
I, I also heard, I forget who it was, someone say that when you lose the objective truth, then the person posing the truth is a matter of who's more powerful or who's more persuasive.
right,
So there is no fixed sense. It then becomes who's more prominent or powerful or persuasive to persuade this
exact,
subjective truth or idea or opinion.
yeah, and we're seeing that today in the power of media, the power of
Yeah.
the news programs, and the power of what used to be reporting. And
Hmm.
the media has so much power and is so persuasive that people think that what comes across through a television or the internet or wherever it's coming through is true because
Hmm.
they're saying it.
Yeah.
And we're living in a time where psychology, which is a very subjective discipline,
Hmm.
is trumping science. So
Yeah.
it's become more authoritative than biology.
Hmm.
And we're living in the insanity of that. But that all stems from what I said is postmodernism. It's a rejection of absolute objective truth. No one has the truth,
Hmm.
or you can't know the truth. Um, and what we're doing when we say those things is we're affirming that truth exists, right?
Yes, that my next question kind of ties into this, and it is, how would you answer someone who says that there is no such thing as truth?
Yeah, that we have to learn how to answer those things. If someone says that there's no such thing as truth, the simple answer is to ask, is that true? Um, because they're depending on that statement being true, right? To say there's no such thing as truth. So, what I've always said, or said for years, is that you can't deny the truth without using it. You have to affirm it in order to use it. So if you say there's no such thing as truth, you're making a truth statement about
A
reality.
truth claim, yeah.
And it's not just word games because they're saying something that is self defeating, uh,
Hmm.
which is what they're doing, is making a self defeating statement, right?
Yeah, which is something we can be learning how to look out for.
Yeah, I think the professor that I had in seminary, Dr. Geisler, he was very big on those things. He was always pointing those things out and helping us understand how to recognize a self defeating statement, something that actually cuts its own throat, defeats itself,
Hmm.
however we want to say it. And we have to be able to listen to people who are saying things that are self defeating. And that people do it all the time. You just have to listen for it. They'll say things like, there's no such thing as truth, or you can't know the truth. Those are all truth statements. They're statements about reality when they say you can't know the truth and so on. And so those are things that we have to learn. We have to learn how to recognize when people are making those statements because they are, in fact, self defeating.
Right.
Yeah.
Self-defeating, self-refuting,
Right. Yeah. Self.
suicide statements.
Sorry. I
I
missed
said suicide statements.
suicide statements. Yeah. They kill themselves. They cut their own
Hmm.
throat. That's what they do, for
Yeah,
sure.
it would be cool to do an episode where we could go through maybe 5 to 7 self-refuting statements that are a little bit more tricky to identify.
Yeah. We'll have to line them up.
Because
Go ahead.
there is no truth is pretty self-explanatory. We do hear it a lot, but obviously you could logically say, is that true?
Mm.
There is no truth. Is that indeed true?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's just really getting to the place where we're listening for it all the time. And
Yeah,
that
and like you said,
yeah,
it's not a word game.
no,
Some people will argue that this is indeed just semantics or a word game, when in reality, it's not a word game.
not at all. Not at all. And it comes back to making sense and things that are true. And once we wander away from truth statements, now we're in like this squishy world where nothing is true. We're living in
Yeah,
a fantasy, or a delusion is really what we're
yes.
living in. And I'm sure I'd catch flack for it. And to say that people who, excluding people who have genuine gender dysphoria, but people who just think that they are the opposite sex because they're caught up in this cultural fad that we're living in. This is only existing
Mhm.
in the United States. In the Western Hemisphere, I should even say, the northern part of the Western Hemisphere. If you go over to Europe and Africa, these things don't exist. They're not even there. The only place that they're there is in the news when they hear about what's going on here.
Yeah.
Uh, they're not having a problem with sports where men are going into women's sports because they want a medal, or they want to somehow dismantle something that women have fought
Mhm.
for 40 years or 50,
Years.
yeah,
Yes.
decades.
Decades.
And
Yeah.
yeah, because they want to win a race. They're 400th in the male competition, but they're number
Right.
one
First
female
place in women's. Yeah.
because they played this diluted game of saying, I identify as this.
Right.
So we have to, I think it's our job is to bring reality back to it and not play the game, not go along with it. Because what they are doing is what we've been accused of as Christians. They are imposing something on us that
Hmm.
we don't believe or subscribe to. And they're not bigots when they do that,
No.
or they're not imposing their morals on us,
And if we don't accept it, we are intolerant.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, which is tolerant. Tolerance is another definition that has been totally changed within
yeah,
the last maybe 10 years.
yeah,
Tolerance now means to be affirming.
yeah,
And
yeah.
if I'm not totally affirming of your beliefs, your subjective truth, then I'm not tolerant. I am.
Let me give you a brief history on postmodernism. Came out of the Middle Ages. We're looking at 800 years ago, somewhere in that vicinity, the 12 or 1300s. And they came from what we call today pre-modern. So modernism is that philosophical age where everything is measured from that. So what came before modernism is pre-modern. What comes after modernism is postmodern.
Post. Okay, this is making things so much more clear.
Yeah, there you go. And modernism was a rejection of the religious side of philosophy and where things were coming from the scholastic period, which is what we call it the Dark Ages. It goes from around, it goes from Augustine to Aquinas, so it goes from the 400s to the 1300s. So almost 1,000 years of what are called the scholastic periods. It's where universities came from, monks and the religious orders in the Western Europe basically dove into the Word of God and basically started to explore all the different kinds of sciences and philosophy and everything else. They reawakened or had a renaissance of the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle
Mhm.
and some others. And what happened with the scholastics is that the Catholic Church was so corrupt that there was a movement, and it basically led up to the Reformation, that basically rejected the theology of the Middle Ages and started to use human reason as the highest point in man. So the modern period was looking at perfecting the ability to logically arrive at conclusions or to know the
Mhm.
truth mainly through reason.
Right.
So that's what modernism in a nutshell is. Now, that gave way to the scientific revolution that took place in the 1700s. You have even earlier than that, you have the printing press being invented by Gutenberg. And
Mhm.
when that thing came along, you don't realize the impact it had. Now you could have books that could be used to teach children academics, where before there were no books because nobody made enough copies of things to teach anything other than at university levels. You had to really arrive at that place. All that to say that reason shows up in the 20th century, late part of the 19th century, failing and doesn't produce what it's going to produce. It doesn't bring us into the golden age of human reason. The First World War, which was called the Great War, was filled with the killing of millions of people and basically just looked like the failure of Western civilization. So postmodernism starts to deconstruct all of the things that modernism had built. Now, modernism isn't gone, but postmodernism has really taken hold.
Yeah.
So the one thing we deconstructed was truth,
Mm.
that you can't arrive at truth. And what you just said about tolerance, meanings no longer are in things or in history. Meanings now are in people. So things mean what I want them to mean if I push
Right.
it to its extreme.
Hmm.
I define these things. So tolerance, the word tolerance, the concept of tolerance used to mean, still does mean it, that I tolerate someone I disagree with. I can still be friends with them. We could still
Hmm.
do things. I can tolerate them. But it has been changed to, as you said, affirmation, that I have to affirm whatever everybody else believes. And postmodernism, what I would say is they attack truth and they attacked what we call a meta narrative. Now, a meta narrative is a concept that there is one story that explains all of reality. So even Darwinian evolution would be a meta narrative. So it explains, doesn't tell the truth, but it explains the way things came to be or
Right.
evolved over time. Christianity would be a meta narrative. Judaism would be a meta narrative. Any religious worldview really would be some sort of meta narrative. And when you deconstruct truth, now you can say no one knows the truth. So Christianity can't be right because there are all these
No
other,
one knows.
yeah, you can't
Yeah.
know the truth. And there are all these other opinions. And they'll say things like, how can 5 million people be wrong or 1 billion people be wrong? They can be wrong.
Or if there are all these different religions, how can Christianity be the only one or the only way?
Exactly. Yep. And that's basically what we end up doing is getting to that place where we're just one more entity in this whole sea and we don't have the truth. No one has the truth. So Christianity can't be true. And when you start to do the comparisons and things as logical, now you're in trouble because you can't have two opposing claims both be true at the same time and in the same sense.
Right.
If
Opposites
truth
cannot.
exists, right? And that's why truth is logically prior to everything else. Once you lose truth, you can't really arrive at any other conclusion. And my mind is just going off into what's called the metaphysical idea of reality
I,
or
I was going to ask you when you were talking about the other meta, if we were going to go into the metaphysics, which that will have to be a whole
that would be a
different
whole, yeah,
show.
a different depth that we would have to
Unpack.
yeah, unpack for sure. That's something we would definitely have to do. That would
Yes.
be a different
And
world.
it's important to do that.
It
Just
is.
like it's important to know objective truth and how to
Yeah.
identify it.
Yeah. You think about it, as Christians, the church is the pillar and support of the truth. Paul tells that in Timothy. He says that the church is the pillar and support of the truth. Now, the gospel can't be true if you don't have a definition of truth that corresponds to reality.
Mhm.
Either Jesus was crucified, died, and rose again, or he didn't. You can't say it's true for me, but not for you.
Right. It's either true or it's not true.
It's either true or it's a lie. It's one or the other. And you can't have Islam that says Jesus wasn't crucified and Christianity that says Jesus was crucified. And Judaism, which would say that he was crucified, but he wasn't God.
The Messiah, yeah. He
Yeah.
wasn't the savior.
He was just a prophet or a teacher or a fake,
Hmm.
one of those things. Either Jesus is who the Bible says he is or he isn't. We have to get to the place where we accept and establish that truth about reality is knowable. First, truth exists, objective truth exists, and then you can know it. Now, no one knows it perfectly
Hmm.
because only God knows things perfectly, but you can know it that it's real.
Right.
You can look at the facts. Like, no one questions whether George Washington was a real person. And mainly because we have records from him. We have some things that he wrote and hundreds of things written about him. So we don't question that. We don't question whether he was a real person. Matter of fact, most people in history, we don't question. Now, we may try to say he owned slaves, so he was a bigot, and try to do this or
Hmm.
that with a knowledge of who he is. But we don't deny his existence. And so that's why we look at the Bible and the New Testament, and we want to see if those who wrote the New Testament, those who were eyewitnesses, if they are credible. And then we talked about why the Bible is important last week. We touched on the subject, but now we start looking at the credibility of the eyewitnesses. And we can't talk about any of these things without affirming that truth exists and that truth about reality is knowable. And we can do the research to find that these things exist.
Yeah, I think that's where this gets a little bit tough is researching. It does take work. You have to put the time in and research. And also, just listening to you talk about this tonight, understanding the importance of learning history.
Yeah,
I think that we have totally lost the importance or knowing the importance of knowing history,
yeah.
knowing postmodernism, premodernism, and then modernism. That's historical. That's something that we should really.
Yeah. And the history of philosophy is really important, even if we call it the history of thought. How did we get to this place? How did we get to the place where in Western civilization, the far and large majority believed in the existence of God, and that there were so few atheists just a few hundred years ago, where today atheism is probably one of the growing
Yeah,
views
I
of
would say
reality,
so.
that God doesn't exist. How did we get to this place? It came through how we think about things and whether or not we accept the existence of God by looking at creation and looking at history, look at the historical record, even as far back as the first century. I've said it before, and it's not original by any means, but archaeology just keeps proving the accuracy of the New Testament.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. I
It
mean,
just blows my mind, especially as a newer Christian. I'm just like, oh wow, this is
and
this is legit.
if you think about archaeology, what we're discovering is just a sliver of history. Because if we're looking at 4,000 years, 6,000 years of recorded history, or that we can go back and find things, it could be older, but it's at least that old. And we're just finding a sliver of things. And a sliver of those things are just testifying to the New Testament and to the existence, the reliability of the New Testament. So you got
Yeah.
to think, where's who's the invisible hand that's letting archaeologists find these things and bringing them up to show? Before the 19th century, skeptics didn't believe that there was ever a city called Nazareth. They denied several things in the New Testament, but now in the last 200 years, they're finding all kinds of things. They denied people existed, denied Luke's writing. But again, truth is the precursor to all of it. You have to believe that you can know the truth about reality. Truth exists, and that we can know the truth about reality. It, it's how science is done. It's how any good history is done.
Hmm.
Because people can be jaded, they can slant things a certain way, but they can also tell the truth.
Right.
That's why you read more than one thing when it comes to those things.
Yeah, when you're researching.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it would be nice maybe to have a couple of book titles maybe in the description below for just a surface level of research for objective truth, like Saving Truth
Right.
by Abdu Murray. That's a
Right.
great starting point
Yep. Yeah, he
for
did
someone who
it.
doesn't have much of a background or understanding of these things. I think that
Yeah.
that was one of the first books that I read that gave me a good, solid
Yeah, absolutely.
understanding. Thank you guys so much for being with us tonight. As always, if you have a question, don't forget to drop it in the comments below. And if you liked our content, if you liked our show, go ahead and give us a like and also subscribe. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.